I call the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased to hear that the Shadow Minister for Agriculture and the Labor Party will support this important legislation before the House, the Water Amendment Bill 2015. This has been coalition policy since the morning of Tuesday, 27 November 2012. And I remember it well because I had a one-on-one meeting with the then opposition leader the night before to discuss this very policy. And it's important policy because this bill gives effect to the government's commitment to legislate a cap on surface water purchases in the Murray Darling Basin to 1,500 gigalitres. Now, the coalition has been committed to a triple bottom line approach, recognising that there are social impacts, there are economic impacts and environmental impacts with whatever we do with the Murray Darling Basin. And we know, as much as anybody, that you are never going to get 100% satisfaction from all sides of the argument when it comes to water. You're always going to get people who disagree with you. Some will say there's not enough water for the environment. Many will say there's not enough water for the irrigators to grow food and fibre. I represent Riverina, one of the best food and fibre producing areas in the nation. Hear, hear, I hear the Shadow Agriculture Minister say, and he's right to support me on that. As of March 2015, there are 1,162 gigalitres of the 1,500 gigalitre cap already obtained, leaving 338 gigalitres of headroom for the strategic purchase of gap-bridging surface water. I hope that strategic purchase is such that it is not, in fact, 338 gigalitres, but much less with the water infrastructure on-farm and off-farm that we are investing in right now. I hope it is much less, and I certainly hope that it's not coming out of the Riverina, which has already given so much. The Commonwealth environmental water holder, David Paps, is already the nation's largest irrigator. This legislation has been warmly received. National Farmers Federation Water Task Force Chairman Les Gordon said in March 2015 that we look forward to working with the government to secure the passage of legislation through the Senate to enshrine the cap as law as soon as possible. It's taken a bit longer than Mr Gordon would have liked, but it is here. John Dalbroy, the Mayor of Griffith, said, "I've been an irrigator all my life and I distress at what is happening in this area." They've forgotten about why the water was there in the first place. Echoing calls from around the region for a major change in water policy, Councillor Dalbroy said that nothing annoys me more than listening to governments of either persuasion saying we are the food bowl of Asia. They're saying you can grow all this food, but we'll tie one hand behind your back. They'll agree with you, but are they doing anything about it? No. Well, tonight I can inform Councillor Dalbroy, and I will. I'll call him as soon as I finish this speech, that we are in fact getting on with the job of capping water buyback, and I know he will be pleased. I'm now going to read from a 1946 edition of the book Water into Gold by Ernestine Hill, first published in 1937. I've referred to this excellent work previously in this House because it is such a valuable reference and provides an insightful snapshot into some history pertinent to the Riverina aspects of this debate. And here's what the author writes of Riverina from the early 1920s, and I quote, New South Wales, the mother state and still the rightful owner of the Murray, had many thousands of soldiers to repatriate, but it was wealthy now beyond the dreams of avarice, 3 times the size of Victoria, with 3 times the fertile lands of South Australia, and infinite resources to command. Since Federation, it had suffered no relapse of the old-time jealousy. Indeed, it had, with the most amazing magnanimity, allowed Victoria to adopt the Murray for mallee irrigation farm schemes, innumerable that were not, it must be admitted, a conspicuous success. And even with railways constructed across the stream to serve its townships on the northern bank that were geographically, if not politically, more closely in touch with Melbourne than with Sydney, New South Wales, as a matter of fact, was busy with schemes of its own. The great majority tributary, the Murrumbidgee, was wholly within the boundaries. On this, energies were concentrated for the time being in yet another miracle of irrigation that would restore our lost world and transform the scorched sand wastes of Hay, Hell and Booligal to a garden paradise yielding $1 million a year. New South Wales cheerfully spent very nearly £8 million in the construction of the magnificent Burrinjuck Dam on the Upper Murrumbidgee, east of Gundagai, with a capacity of 33.5 billion cubic feet, the Merribed Weir, west of Wagga Wagga, the Yanco Weir, and in 1,000 miles of channelling, advances to settlers for homes, towns and railways to build for them, factories for their produce, roads and electric supplies to bring into being 1,000 farms. Burrinjuck opened 300,000 acres for settlement within 100 miles of it, regulated the flow of the river for 730 miles, assured constant water supplies for 1 million grazing acres, and bejewelled the darkness of the Australian night with the electric lights of Canberra, Queanbeyan, Gundagai, Tumut, Wagga, Junee, Cootamundra, Temora, Murrumburra, Harden, Yast, Young, Grenfell, Cowra and Wyangla. 2,000 settlers on the Murrumbidgee irrigation areas occupy 300,000 acres, many of them returned soldiers, and there is unlimited scope for more. A note in the prospectuses of the Water and Irrigation Commission of New South Wales informs us that further farms will be made available as demand requires. 8,000 people are living on the Yanco irrigation area, with Leeton as the chief town, and 9,000 on the Marul area, the centre of which is Griffith. Fat lambs, dairying, fodder crops and fruit are the mainstays of the Murrumbidgee area, now exporting its excellent canned peaches and apricots to England. One cooperative canning factory alone in Leeton treats 120 tonnes a day. Practically the whole of the New South Wales production of canning peaches is grown in the district. With nearly 300,000 bushels of citrus a year, fresh fruits and vegetables for the Sydney markets, and 3/4 of the total state production of grapes from 21,000 acres of orchard and vinland. For the rest, the advancement of settlement may be estimated by the fact that there are now 4 towns of considerable size: Griffith, Leeton, Yanco and Yenda, 3 distinct railway lines, and on and on and on. The article goes on to talk about the miracle of rice production in the Riverina. First planted in Yanco, when the New South Wales Water Conservation and Irrigation Commission began to take an interest in the enterprise. And up until 1923, Australia imported all her rice from the east, the article states, the book states. But in that year, 3 varieties planted experimentally on a large scale at Yanco proved successful: Javan, Californian, and the seed obtained from Mr. Takasuka of Naya, because his hobby was rice. The American adapted itself to Australian conditions, and from the first 20 tonnes of seed distributed to settlers by the government as an experiment, today, we're talking early 1920s, 20,000 hectares of paddy fields have sprung up, adding their wealth to that of the dairy pastures and orchards in country which was considered worthless save for sheep. Today, the Murrumbidgee irrigation areas are producing— I should have said that was actually when the book was reprinted in the 1940s. Today, the Murrumbidgee irrigation areas are producing sufficient table rice to supply Australia 313 growers on an average 80 acres each, to reaping an annual £368,000 from rice alone. The ever-present problem of markets and the fear of overproduction are the only factors that hold the progress of the settlements in check. Well, if today markets and overproduction were the only impediments, Mr Speaker. Indeed, our government has successfully negotiated preferential trade agreements which have opened up unprecedented opportunities for the Riverina and other regional areas. The previous Labor government, despite what you might have just heard from the previous Speaker, at the behest of the Greens in the Lower House in the 43rd Parliament, forced a man-made drought on the Riverina and other irrigation areas and did very little by way of trying to forge new trade agreements. Very little. This legislation goes some of the way to making things right. There is still more to be done, much more to be done. And I was pleased to be able to read from that book, Water into Gold, written in the 70 years ago, as I say. And when you look at what was made available from the precious resource water then and how it's transformed to today, you get a bit of a snapshot of just why the Riverina is such an important fibre and food bowl. Now, Jenny Ryan, the Administration Officer, Economic Development and Tourism of Narrandera Shire Council today, told me that 2 of Narrandera Shire's businesses produce 6,510 20-foot equivalent units in annual containerised freight. And this does not include figures from the nut plantations in the Narrandera Shire, one of which is an operation which will have more than 1 million trees under harvest within the next few years. And it can also be noted that the Riverina produces 129,000 TEU, of which 72% currently is transported by rail. They're 2013-14 figures. And if we look at Narrandera, if we look at Griffith, the regional overview, more than $2 billion annual production, in agriculture and horticulture, just out of Griffith City Council local government area alone. It's Australia's largest producer of wine. 1 out of every 4 glasses of wine comes from Griffith. Yes, really. Really, the member opposite, absolutely. About half of the region's wine production is exported. Largest chicken meat producer in Australia. It supplies 3/4 of New South Wales wine grapes. Supplies 70% of New South Wales citrus production, worth $98 million. Largest prune growing area in Australia. Almond production, it's going absolutely amazingly well. Gross regional product, manufacturing, and these are just 2010 figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, so they would have gone a long way further since then. Manufacturing, $281 million. Agriculture, $294 million. Finance and insurance, $189 million. Retail trade, $86 million. That's out of Griffith alone. That's just out of Griffith alone. You could imagine when you include the Murrumbidgee Shires, Leeton Shires, Narrandera Shires, Carrathul Shires, just how valuable the Riverina is. And I was a little bit sorry that I had to come down and speak because Minister Joyce was unavailable to speak at that particular time, because I was going to be very interested to hear what the Greens member for Melbourne was actually going to say about this. And I hope that he gets on board, because, by goodness, we didn't hear too much positive coming out of the Greens during the whole time the Murray Darling Basin issue was an absolute political hot potato in the 43rd Parliament. Indeed, what we saw from the Greens was totally destructive. They wanted all the water to go for the environment. To hell with the farmers, to hell with the irrigators, and to hell with those people who grow food and fibre for this nation. Never mind, the bright city lights of Swanston Street. All he cared about was, the environmental concerns. And sure, the world's best environmentalists are the irrigation farmers I represent. They are the world's best environmentalists, because they know, much more so than the member for Melbourne, that if their river is not protected and doesn't flow, then they're not going to have an income. But they can't continue to do what they do on 17% allocations. They can't continue to do what they do for our nation and other nations besides, when they're getting totally screwed over by man-made droughts forced upon them by sometimes they might seem to be well-intentioned governments, but they certainly aren't when it comes to putting what the Labor-Greens alliance did in the Parliament from 2010 to 13. Now, I was pleased that the Parliamentary Secretary for the Environment, Bob Bourne, came to my area on 5 August this year to announce $263.5 million for on-farm irrigation in New South Wales. Now, that is going to be a game-changer for the Riverina. It's also going to dovetail in well with this water amendment bill that we are debating tonight. Now, the Environment Minister, Greg Hunt, has congratulated the successful funding recipients of Round 5 of the On-Farm Irrigation Efficiency Program. He said under the Coalition's Clean Water Plan, we're investing more than $12 billion in managing our waterways and key water infrastructure. This latest $263.5 million investment will assist irrigators in the southern Murray-Darling Basin modernise their on-farm irrigation infrastructure. That money is going to be put to such good use to maximise every drop. And the trouble is, farmers in my area have been for a long time, will continue to do so, are doing so now. They make sure they have to be accountable for every single drop of water that they use. Never mind the water icon sites and the Greenies and the environment, the Wentworth Group and all these other people who think that all the water needs to go down the river and straight out of the mouth of the Murray. Never mind the fact that they're not that accountable for the water. They are not. But I tell you what, the farmers in my patch are, and they have to be accountable, not for the very least that it costs them money, but also the fact that they are made to be accountable by the innumerable number of bureaucracies that they have to answer to. More's the pity. But I'm pleased that that $250 million worth of on-farm irrigation infrastructure is going to make a difference. On June 24 this year, the Senate resolved to establish a select committee on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. The committee will inquire on the social, economic and environmental impacts of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan on regional communities. Public submissions may be made and close on 20 September. I would urge that any Riverina irrigators listening to this speech make a public submission, and there will be many listening. I encourage that this water amendment bill pass unanimously, because that is what is required.